2/3 of Idaho's acreage is owned by the federal government. That's about 34.5 million acres being managed by either the Bureau of Land Management or the U.S. Forest Service. That's the fourth most of any state in the country. We learned that yesterday when we broke down what makes up public land across the West. So continuing our look today into the battleground of Idaho's public lands, we are turning our focus on the land owned by the state. When Idaho did join the Union back in 1890, the federal government gave the state more than 3.5 million acres. Well, these days that number has decreased to about 2.5 million acres, or about 5% of the state. Endowment land, it's called. And Joe Paris explains what that means, why it's crucial to Idaho for both recreation and revenue.
The state of Idaho has a unique arrangement, almost a checkerboard of different agencies that have ownership and management of different swaths. But how does state land play into all of this? State land like I'm on right now, outside the Boise foothills.
There has been this lack of understanding for years, really since statehood, right? These lands that were granted to the state of Idaho were granted by the federal government starting right around the Civil War.
Dustin Miller is director of the Idaho Department of Lands. He talks lands for a living.
We received a total of 3.6 million acres for the sole purpose of funding the various institutions needed to begin providing services for a new state.
The endowment land, as it's called, still helps to power those services till this day.
The public education system, the state penitentiary system, the state hospital system. And so the focus there was for the states to utilize those endowment lands to produce revenue and manage those natural resources in a way to produce revenue and maximize revenue for the endowment beneficiaries. And 85% of the acres we manage belong to Idaho's public schools.
Particular parcels belong to specific endowments. This interactive map helps to show how it all fits together. The Land Board, made up of Idaho's top officials, provides directions to the Department of Lands in their management of approximately 2.5 million acres of that state trust land. But how does the Idaho Land Board generate money from it? Well, in the beginning, it was selling land as an easy solution.
Land began being sold by the Land Board shortly after statehood and really slowed at about World War II, following World War II. About 1 million acres, 1.1 million acres were divested of, and a lot of those were more of the cropland areas, better fertile farm ground. Those were sold into private ownership, and we retained most of the timberland acres.
Leaders knew that selling all the land would not help future generations, so they got to work on the land, and it continues as we speak.
Sell timber on those lands. On about 1 million acres of what we have right now is timberlands, and that produces about 90% of the revenue for the endowment beneficiaries. We also lease lands for livestock grazing, for communication sites, commercial leasing, mineral leasing, recreational leasing, and other types of leases to produce that revenue. And so they are working lands. They belong to the endowment beneficiaries, but they do not belong to the general public.
But that doesn't mean the general public doesn't get to use them for hikes, bikes, delights.
Managing these lands to produce income, that's paramount. That's the endowment mission. But we're also keeping these lands open for public recreation. But we need to continue to get our message out to inform the public on what the true nature of these lands really is. And they're set aside for a purpose to produce that revenue for the endowments.
Like the trees on the landscape, the Land Board wants to see that money made grow.
That money is sent over to the Endowment Fund Investment Board that manages a $3.5 billion permanent fund for the endowment. So the land and the financial instruments work together to produce those distributions for our endowment beneficiaries.
Not every piece of land that Idaho owns is endowment land. The state has certainly acquired land beyond the initial gift from the government. Idaho Parks and Recreation maintains great places to visit, hike, and camp, and the state still looks to purchase for several purposes.
And in the last 5 years, I think we've acquired more than 50,000 acres of additional timberlands that we've purchased from private timberland owners. And so we are growing the state assets, the state land assets slowly, but we do have a land bank that allows us to use those funds to purchase lands that make sense for us to manage and make sense for us to acquire.
Idaho does sell land in very specific cases, but knows that they can usually maximize endowment land with continued operations that have led to sizable payouts.
Last year, the distribution based off of, again, our work on the land and the work done by the Endowment Fund Investment Board was about $100 million that was doled out to the beneficiaries.
So it can be a complicated conversation for sure, but if you realize you're on state endowment land, the next time you're out and about, you can tell the people you're with it's parcels with a purpose.
Okay, so state land is that public land, but of course with specific interests that optimize endowment land to benefit what it benefits. Idaho's public land, state and federal, they do generate a lot of conversation, especially of late when we talked, or there was talk of selling it off. Well, a growing debate is who should control those lands. Some Idahoans wonder, could the state do a better job than the federal government? And what would that mean for public access? We're going to talk about that tomorrow here on the 208.